watching The Human Condition, and I'm your host, Jeffrey Pertz. Thank you for joining again. This is the third show of this channel. This show we're going to be talking about the brain and the different layers of the brain and how they give birth to the experience that we have, how those layers of the brain receive consciousness. To have a small understanding of how the brain works is a requirement for being a human being, and is not a subject many people choose to research or choose to go back and re-look at what they know about it. I'm not talking about going out and, being a brain surgeon and learning all that stuff. I'm just talking about, having the owner's manual to the brain, being a proud owner of a human brain. Knowledge of the human brain has been around for longer than we're told, and knowledge about the human brain is much more extensive than what we know as a collective. The ancients knew a whole lot about the brain and its functions. This, like most of the information in this show, will be the occult. This is occult information. And the reason why I say that is the occult means nothing more than hidden from view. You have the Latin derivative occultare, which means that which is not easily accessible to vision. That's all the word the occult means, and that's all it has ever meant. For example, the forces of gravity are occulted, but you can use the scientific method and tools like iron shavings to see the magnetic field of the object. You really never actually see the field itself. All you see is the outline that is traced by the metal shaving. So the forces of gravity are occulted from our view, but we can still objectively see it work. So I will use the golden space brain that I have made for you. I will take it apart for you here. There we go. Let's start with the most ancient part of the brain, which would be the R complex. The R complex of the brain, or aka the reptilian brain, also known as the sacred masculine among the occult traditions. The reason why the R complex is considered to be masculine in ancient symbology is because it's the part of the brain that mostly deals with action, movement, survival, kind of manly things. It is known as the father or creator because it begins the thought, emotion, and action process. Its masculine principles are survival and reaction, and holds the fight or flight responses. The R complex receives the thought that has not reached the process through the higher orders of the brain, emotion and action. Everything begins with this part of the brain because it is what receives information first. Also, this part of the brain facilitates movement and involuntary reactions and functions. In the old occult traditions, the R complex, or sacred masculine principle, is represented by the sun, or a triangle pointing upwards, representing a spear or a thrusting object, like a phallus. So the R complex is what receives all the data from the environment we're in and controls involuntary actions, including fight or flight responses and hormones and whatnot. R stands for the reptile complex because it is the primary structure in reptile brains. Their brain does not have much more than that structure itself. The R complex is responsible for motor functions, heartbeat, body temp, involuntary movements, and functions, and fight or flight responses. So the R complex itself consists of the brainstem, which I'm circling with the mouse right here, and nothing higher than this is part of the R complex. Anything higher than this would be the mammalian brain, which we're not getting into yet. So the R complex, which I'm circling right here, consists of the brainstem and cerebellum. Right here, this is the cerebellum right here. And so the R complex, like I said, receives data first. The cerebellum, which I'm circling right here, part of the R complex, receives like vision first and does other things. That's like your interface for sight. The R complex is what controls our involuntary reactions and functions. When the R complex is in fight or flight mode, it tells the body to release adrenaline, and large portions of blood are pumped out of the head and torso, and the blood is redirected into the arms and legs. So the body, the R complex tells the body to pump the blood away from the head and torso and into the arms and legs. This is because the whole body will need extra energy in those parts in order to survive flight or fight. This causes brain trauma if one is in a constant state of fight or flight, which is a good portion of the entire world's population of people. The next part of the brain we're going to be talking about is the mammalian brain, or the limbic brain. The occult traditions call this the sacred feminine, or the mother or the spirit, because it is the feminine emotional part of the brain. The mammalian brain is represented by the moon or a chalice, which is an upside down triangle. Water is the symbol for emotions in the language of symbology, which is ancient and very important. And so that's why the chalice, they call it the chalice. It holds emotions. It's all these feminine qualities. It holds things like the mother holds things in the womb. It is the second part of the thought, emotion, and action trinity. The other 4 chambered heart mammals in the animal kingdom have this part of the brain and the R complex, and not much more. All right, so right here, I'm going to be circling the limbic system, or the mammalian brain. The limbic brain consists of the hypothalamus, which like releases hormones, the hippocampus, which is like memories and emotions, the amygdala, which deals with like fear and anger emotions, the thalamus, the pituitary gland, which releases hormones that would help one to grow and develop. The limbic system is a set of structures in the brain that deal with emotions and memory. It regulates autonomic and endocrine functions in the response to emotional stimuli, and also is involved in reinforcing behavior. So this part of the brain makes our emotions capable of being expressed through our body. It releases the proper neuropeptides and neurotransmitters to make us feel the consequences of our emotions. Neuropeptides are like oxytocin, vasopressin, insulin, glucagon. They are slow acting, unlike neurotransmitters, which are dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, and histamine. This part of the brain helps us to make bonds with others, or experience ecstasy or feel anxiety if it calls upon the R complex to release the adrenaline and cortisol and glucose, which are damaging to your body. Also, the limbic brain facilitates our learning and memory. So the final part of the brain I will explain is the neocortex. The occult traditions call this the divine child, and is the third part of the thought, emotion, action trinity. So the occult traditions represented them with like a flower, a cross, like a baby, mostly 2 equilateral triangles. Remember the first 2 symbols that I mentioned? That was 2 triangles, one pointing up and one pointing down. The spear and the chalice. The masculine and the feminine. So the masculine's the up pointing triangle and the feminine's the down pointing triangle. So the mammalian brain is represented by 2 equilateral triangles intertwined with each other, which looks like the Star of David, which is where the Star of David comes from, but it started more in the East and Asia. This part of the brain is what distinguishes us from the rest of the animal kingdom. The neocortex gives us higher order thinking. It is responsible for art, music, science, math, verbal, written communication, and speech. The neocortex is split into 2 hemispheres that are connected by a membrane called the corpus callosum, which lets the 2 sides communicate. The left side of the neocortex facilitates intellect and analytical thought, science, and math, and it is connected to the R complex. It breaks down the physical world details and analyzes them piece by piece. The right side of the neocortex facilitates human creativity, emotional makeup, holistic thought, compassion, intuition, big picture thinking, and pattern recognition. It is the care and ethics part of the brain and is connected to the limbic brain, or the mammalian brain. We are the only animals that have a brain as complex as ours. No other animals have this part of the brain as developed as humans. They do not have the hardware to understand right and wrong. That's why I'm explaining this part to you about your brain. This part of your brain helps you to know right and wrong. So animals can only experience what the R complex and the mammalian brain and the little bit higher order parts let them experience. The left part of the neocortex is mostly connected to the R complex, making it masculine. The right side of the neocortex is mostly connected to the mammalian brain, making it feminine in symbology and understanding what they are. The R complex being male and the mammalian brain being female in nature, they give birth to the divine child, which is a male child of creation, a child that is created and continues to create. The thought is the father, or the creator being, R complex. The emotion is the spirit, or the mother, or the mammalian brain. And action is the divine male child in the neocortex. And male because that male is outward in symbology and expresses outwards. Female or feminine is inwards. It wouldn't be a feminine child because this is physical. This is symbology. So get over it if you're one of those types. There's supposed to be a balance of masculine and feminine principles in all humans. So a balanced brain is the left and the right hemispheres being in alignment with each other. The R complex and the mammalian brain working in balance. So a balanced brain is supposed to be the R complex and the mammalian brain working together in harmony to create the child, or the higher order thinking, which is the divine child. So the old traditions called this the path of mildness, just balance. And I'm going to talk about that after I finish about the brain. A balanced brain is when your thoughts, emotions, and actions are in alignment. They are not in disharmony with each other. So, and I want to make this note, and it's really important. The brain is not what seems to be making consciousness happen. Rather, it is what is receiving consciousness, like a radio or a TV receiving a signal. I'll name a couple of people, scientists and researchers, that have been pioneers towards this understanding of what reality is. Dr. Thomas Campbell, he's the author of My Big Toe Theory, describes consciousness as being the whole of the system, and the brain and the bodies are avatars and receivers of consciousness. Dr. Stuart Hameroff, who is a neurosurgeon, I do believe, has found that consciousness might be a result of a quantum process of microtubules in the synapses of the brain. So, in that matter itself is actually small units of consciousness. And so basically he says that we're made of the good stuff as far as units of consciousness go. And so that's why we have the experience that we're having. Michael Talbot, he wrote a book called Holographic Universe, and he states that the universe acts like a hologram. And so like a holographic plate has information on it, for example, a picture of a chair. And if you were to take that holographic plate and break it apart and look at those different pieces that you broke apart, each piece would contain the same exact holographic image of that chair. So you cannot destroy the information that was put into that holographic plate. Michael Talbot found that the universe behaves just like that. So any point in space and time contains infinity in itself. So in saying that, it seems that the ancients were right when they said that the universe and everything in it is mental in nature. And like in the Bible, God said, "Let there be light." And it was a word that spoke the universe into existence. And so consciousness seems to be a non-ending thing that we can't quite understand. So however you look at it, you're not just an automaton robot. It seems that we are pure infinite consciousness divided into smaller portions that are a little less aware. So, like I said earlier, adrenaline from fight or flight causes brain damage by releasing cortisol and glucose from the earlier precursor, which would be adrenaline. So the body releases adrenaline from fear response, and then cortisol and glucose comes in to kind of repair it. When this is done on a constant basis, the brain gets synaptical damage and brain trauma. And so blood pressure goes up and all this horrible stuff from that. It's basically brain damage. It's trauma. It is brain damage. And a person becomes confused. And what happens is what they think is not in alignment with what they feel, and that's not in alignment with how they act. So confusion leads to fear and shuts consciousness down. Damage or trauma leads to brain imbalance, which is what is happening to most people. The reason why is because it creates inner opposition in people, which makes opposition amongst people, which leads to confusion, and the outcome is suffering. And the outcome is an easily controlled, divided group of people or masses. Adrenaline is more neurotoxic than most hard drugs in the world. The other two, cortisol and glucose chemicals, have to come in and clean it up. Okay, so let's go into these brain imbalances more and what they do. So when somebody's in fight or flight all the time, the R complex is overactive and it shuts down the mammalian brain. The mammalian brain becomes damaged. And so the R complex takes executive function over the brain. This can be caused by physical abuse, traumatic events like war or violent robberies. For example, like the traumatic job of being a cop can cause the left brain and R complex to take executive order, because cops don't have the right to do what they do because it violates natural law to do what they do. And that's why their job's hard, because they're actually doing something they're not supposed to be doing. And so that causes a cop to have adrenaline rushes all the time because they're chasing people and, putting their knees in people's backs, and, they are adrenaline driven people. And so cops give away their free will to violently enforce all laws, some laws being cruel and unusual. And so they're not even thinking. When the R complex of the brain takes executive function, the behavior of the person is cold, domineering, paranoid, controlling, and greedy. Okay, so this person's really only thinking with their R complex and their left part of their neocortex. They're living in the left side of their brain. They are left brain thinkers because they don't have the mammalian and right side of the brain, or the emotional, nurturing side of the brain, or creative part of the brain to balance them out. So, people who have jobs in which they have control over somebody else's life usually have a left brain imbalance, which would be a overactive R complex, underactive mammalian brain, and just the left side of the neocortex being a little bit active. We're going to talk about the other side of this type of brain imbalance, which would be right brain imbalance. This is when the mammalian emotional brain is overactive from such things as emotional abuse or religious mania, isolation, lack of stimulation. So what happens is the R complex shuts down and the mammalian brain takes executive function. The resulting behavior is self-loathing, submissiveness, loss of survival instinct, loss of will to live, submitting to crazy imaginative scenarios that are not real. This type of person would be your super easy pushover person, a person who doesn't want to defend themselves, dreams up weird stuff that's not based in reality at all. These are people who are in the mindset of being submissive slaves. These are people who blindly submit to authority without question. So when the mammalian brain has executive function, the right side of the neocortex is more active than the left. So this would be considered a right brain imbalance. It is somebody who lives in the right side of their brain all the time. Most people are in a left brain imbalance, and they're like control freaks, while some people are right brain submissive slaves. And this can vary a little bit and oscillate depending on who the person is interacting with, such as a boss or a younger sibling or a person of higher or lower social status. A domineer can still submit to a boss, just as a slave-minded person can still beat a little sister into submission. Either way, the imbalance, no matter what type, causes a schism in the mind. That's what this imbalance is called, is a schism. A schism is a contradiction of the self. The true natural self is supposed to live in unison with their thoughts, emotions, and actions. The thoughts are the Father, Creator, sacred masculine, and begins in the R complex. The emotions are the spirit in which we do things, or the mother or the sacred feminine, which is the mammalian brain, and they both work in unison to birth the neocortex, or the male divine child of action and creation. So thoughts, emotions, and actions are in unison. How you think is how you feel, is how you act. And they are not in opposition with each other. And that's all I have on the brain today. Thank you for tuning in. And in the next episode, we're going to be talking more about the imbalances and how those manifest in the world and how those manifest inside. Thank you for watching The Human Condition.